everyone. Welcome to Livestream Thursday with VS Code. Really excited for today because we have a really cool engineer, Matt Ling from the Stripe team, who's going to be talking about the Stripe CLI and the Stripe extension in VS Code. And real quick, if you're watching from home or from your office, wherever you may be in these times right now, maybe you're traveling, I don't know. Go ahead and drop in the chat so we can say hi and tell us if you're excited for this broadcast. You might be noticing if you watch these regularly, you've seen me on these live streams before. I have a slightly different background. And that's just because I'm in a hotel. So hopefully I don't have any technical difficulties with the Wi-Fi or anything, just coming at you from a slightly different location today. And we got some, hey Cecil, how's it going? Cecil is a developer advocate at Stripe, so happy to see you in the chat. We have one comment, what is Stripe? And we will definitely dive into that when we have our guest come on. We'll have him do a quick intro of what he does and what Stripe is and how you can benefit from that. Hey, everyone in the chat. Got a lot of good buzz going on. I know if you don't follow us on Twitter already, definitely do, because we tweet out about these live streams every week. And we had some buzz going on. So one of the tweets we got was, I'm currently working on Stripe integration and have been using Terminal so far to run Stripe CLI and redirect webhooks locally. Curious to see how the VS Code extension can help in my case. So that came from Dejan on Twitter. So Dejan, if you're watching, then hopefully you'll learn something from here. We got some more hellos. Oh, we're from all over the place, from the UK. We got some people coming in from India. Thank you for taking the time to come hang out with us. I think it'll be a really great live stream. So without further ado, let's go ahead and bring on our guest, Matt, so we can learn about what Stripe is and how you can use about that integration with VS Code.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Really, really good. Yeah, cool. Thanks for having me. Yeah, my name's Matt Ling. I'm a developer advocate over at Stripe. Started about late 2019 as a support engineer, so got to answer a lot of technical questions, and then moved to like developer advocacy around like mid of last year. Yeah, Stripe is Stripe's a payments infrastructure company. We basically enable businesses of all sizes, from like solopreneurs all the way up to enterprise, to run their all of their financial concerns like on our platform. So you can do things like create no-code payment links, right? So you can send a payment link out to somebody to get paid, or you could build a complete the next Uber, right? Where a platform where you've got tons of people getting paid out, and you can enable other folks to actually do business. So lots of products, from running subscription services, using billing, checkout for very low code payment solutions. So yeah, financial infrastructure company. So happy to talk.
Cool. Yeah, and Stripe handles, I haven't really worked in a system that deals with payments, but Stripe is really great because it will handle any sort of compliance things that you have to deal with, right? You don't have to worry about that.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the most important things. Like, so, when you're dealing with credit cards, it's very, very easy suddenly to become quite burdensome to keep up with what's called PCI compliance, which means that your systems need to be audited every year to make sure they're compliant. But using Stripe technology, specifically Stripe JS, payment elements, and things like that, and it takes all of that PCI burden away from you. So you can run your you just like basically we take all of that work away from you, and you could just focus on your business. You don't need to be a payments expert. Like we just do all that for you.
Love that. I love anything that just does it for me.
Right.
Looks like we've already got some people like, oh, okay. So Polto, glad that we could answer what Stripe does. And I think with that, we can dive into what you have to show us today.
Yeah, thanks. So today, I'd like to talk about the Stripe CLI and the VS Code extension. Like, the VS Code extension essentially is underpinned by the Stripe CLI, so it really makes sense to kind of look at the fundamentals of the CLI first, and how that kind of enables you to kind of make use of all of those features in your IDE when you're inside VS Code, right? So it's kind of a story of like 2/3 CLI, 1/3 VS Code.
Cool.
So maybe like for folks who are maybe kind of early on in their careers, what is a CLI, right? Well, it means a command line interface. So it's basically a tool or a set of tools that let you interface with other systems, right? So it could be an API or a set of services, like it's like Amazon. And I think the first CLI I saw, it certainly wasn't any of the first CLI ever, but certainly the first CLI I think I came across where I was like, oh, this is really great, was like Heroku CLI, because I was like I'm really into Rails, and historically that's kind of like where I really started getting into web dev, or at least kind of agile web dev, if you like. And it was really cool. Like you could like ramp your whole Rails system, set your environment variables, set up your custom domains all from the command line. I was like, oh, this is so great, right? You could literally up and running in like a few minutes. So in that sense, like the Stripe CLI is pretty similar. It's a collection of tools that help you build, test, manage, and integrate your with Stripe. So it's really there to kind of like to enhance the developer experience, and we hope that it should be. We believe it should be, and we hope that it becomes kind of an essential part of like your tool chain when you're developing with against Stripe. So we'll start with the CLI. We'll look at resource management. So CRUD, another acronym: create, retrieve, update, delete of your Stripe API resources. We'll look at kind of like listing things from the API. So like it's kind of fundamental things, but I'll show maybe a couple more advanced use cases where you can really delve into like how sophisticated the API is. We're going to then move on to another really important topic, events, right? So events are generated in your Stripe account, like important events like getting paid, for example. And we'll look at all the things you can do with your events, and specifically around like listening for them and reacting on them. We'll look at how you can securely tunnel those events into your local development environment, so you can actually program your business logic locally. And then another really cool feature with the CLI. We're going to stand up a whole sample, a whole working accept a payment sample with just like a few clicks inside the VS Code extension. So that's kind of like the order of business. Hopefully,
love it. Sounds like we're covering some good stuff.
Yeah, I'll try not to go too fast and certainly not too slow. Okay, so maybe we start with like installation. So I guess let me move this screen over.
Yeah, we'll add the screen. And just real quick before we dive into it, we do have one question in the chat. Is Stripe similar to PayPal, or is it more embedded?
Is it similar to PayPal? I mean, it's similar in the sense that we operate in the same kind of business area, like helping people to process payments. But so yeah, it's similar in that sense. Embedded is an interesting word. Like we really want to enable everybody, like to really level the playing field in that sense. So when we talk about embedding things, you can create a payment link, and you can literally just set it as an anchor in your HTML, and you've got a payment system, right? You can click on that link and you'll land in checkout, and everything is taken care for you. Same with checkout in a way, but checkout is a little bit more configurable currently, but there is parity actually in those two technologies. Payment links is catching up in that sense. And then in terms of embedding, you can also with Stripe payment elements specifically, but we support a multitude of elements. You can embed those directly onto your website. So there's a lot of options for you there. It really depends on kind of like what kind of experience you want to offer your users and how much kind of that development burden you want to take on yourself.
Awesome. Cool. All right. So we can transition to the demo, but as we're going through this, y'all definitely throw any questions in the chat and I'll throw them up and we can get some of those answered by Matt.
Yeah, cool. So on our docs under development tools, Stripe CLI getting started, you'll see like there's a ton of ways you can install the Stripe CLI from a Docker image, and if you're on some Linux variants as apt. I'm on Mac OS X, so I'm using a Homebrew. So I'm just gonna like dump this into the terminal. It's not going to do anything because I already have it installed, but that's basically as simple as it gets for installing it on Mac. So let's see. So let's maybe just run the Stripe command. I'm going to pipe it to bat so we can move around and see what's in the standard out. So generally speaking, we'll always issue the command Stripe and then the command. So as I said, we'll look at some resource commands. We're gonna play around with some of the usual suspects, customers and payment intents. Then we're gonna look at like webhook commands, listening for events, triggering events. I think there's a couple other things here. Samples. We're going to stand up a whole sample just basically on the command line, but we'll do it in this case through the VS Code extension. And a couple of other things. So there's a lot of stuff in there, but we'll cover all of the major and really powerful features. So let's start with like some things that we can just do straight off the bat. Stripe status. So this is telling us that the API services are online, so we're in great shape. Next, we'll look at Stripe open. So let me pipe that one to bat too. In case you don't know what bat is like cat, but it's just kind of like on steroids. You can do it. It lets you use Vim key bindings, and it does like syntax highlighting and things like that for different kind of programming languages. When we say Stripe open, it gives us a list of all of these shortcuts here. So API ref, they have the same target, but you can use either one. Dashboard, and that's really, really useful. If you just want to jump straight into a certain part of our docs or in the dashboard, you can do that from the command line. So Stripe open API, and it just directs us straight into the API ref, right? So that's really useful because, like, to be honest, if I'm using Safari, which is my kind of my default browser, I have the API ref pinned. It's always open, because it's just invaluable for looking at the resources available, all of the parameters and commands and stuff like that.
Awesome. So yeah, you have a lot of really good documentation for this.
Yeah, we get a lot of great feedback. So while we're here, though, let's actually just quickly look at maybe, like, say, creating a custom, which we're going to do today. If you look at these language selections here, we support sample code directly in the docs for all of our 7 supported languages, but there's also curl and Stripe CLI. So when you're kind of playing with the Stripe CLI and learning and experimenting, just go and copy those commands directly from the API ref, dump them into the terminal, and you're off to the races. So a little tip there. So let's open a couple more of those links. We're going to look a lot at customers today, so let's jump in there. So I think I've made that point pretty well. You can jump into like sub pages in the into the dashboard. Let me open one more that I think we're going to need today, is API keys. So your API keys are your secret keys that you need. Well, the publishable key is not so secret because you can actually send that to the front end, but your API key, your secret key, is what you'll use to speak to the Stripe API. So we'll look at that in a second. Cool. So we covered some very basic things, looking at the status, opening some shortcuts directly into the documentation. So let's go and connect our Stripe CLI to our account. So in order to connect the CLI to account, we go and just log in. So login will actually give us this pairing code: loved, famous, warmer, trust. And then will prompt us to open the browser when we hit enter. And then we're supposed to, to basically confirm that phrase is the same, which it is. If you have more than one Stripe account, by the way, you can connect it to any of them from here. I only have one for this particular user, so I'll just connect it to VS Code and say allow access. Great. So access granted, and we can close this. So if we jump back into the terminal, we can see that we're now connected. So it's simple as that for logging or connecting.
Is it free to create an account and everything?
Oh yeah, totally free. Yeah. You can just get up and running in minutes. So another thing to note, if you're using the CLI but you don't have access, let's say you decide to deploy the CLI into like maybe a continuous integration system or something like that, and you don't have access to a browser, you can use this -i, which is short for minus interactive. And then you can just paste your API key. I hope I copied it. I'm going to do it again just in case. You can just paste your API key directly here, and you don't have to do that browser round trip. And I think I do this like as a matter of course because it's just faster. I don't have to do the browser round trip, and I usually have my key like stored in the buffer somewhere or in some sort of like text expander. So you can do that. Useful for when you want a quick login. So let's move on to like creating some or issuing some commands against the API, and we call these like resource commands. So let's look at the resources that we can actually speak to in the API. There's a lot. For the most part, it maps like one-to-one to the whole API. So we're going to be dealing with, as I said earlier, some of the usual suspects, customers, payment intents, but it is pretty rich. You can really manipulate a lot in the API, and pretty much everything via the command line. So customers. So let's start with our CRUD command. So create, retrieve, update, and delete, and we'll deal with customers first. So customers. So again, we can use the help switch to get help on what we can do with this customers resource, and it's -h is the shorthand for that. So how we use the customers resource command is Stripe customers and then the operation. So pretty straightforward. Create, update, delete, and all these other command operations that you can execute against the customers API. So let's go one step further. Let's look at what create will give us. So with create, we can pass all of these. This isn't an exhaustive list, but it's like a lot of the most kind of popular parameters that you might want to use. So we give you a selection here. So let's go ahead and create a customer called foo bar. Okay, invalid API key. Okay, I'm gonna just log in again. The demo gods, I know that they're out to get me today.
Yeah.
All right. All right, let's log in.
It always happens.
Okay.
While this is happening, we do have a question in the chat. Can you connect Stripe to your database?
Do you mean the Stripe CLI? No. But I can definitely give you some ideas on when the Stripe CLI will become really important when you do want to do something with your database, and that will be with your webhook endpoint. And we'll kind of come to that in about 2 or 3 kind of sections.
Cool. Awesome.
But like there's no kind of native database connection with the Stripe CLI though. But that's a great question. So I'm just going to make sure that I have this connected. Great. So let's create a customer. Stripe customers create. All right. So cool. We've got a customer called foobar. So pretty straightforward. The CLI went to the API, made the call for us, created a customer, and then the API responded with this response and this JSON. So I'll copy that customer ID. So that's the create done. Let's retrieve that customer. Oops, customers, retrieve, I before E. and we have that customer. Okay, so pretty straightforward. So let's update them to that customer, and we're going to change their name to Bar Baz. And great, we've updated that customer. So like this might seem pretty fundamental, but think about it. You haven't gone to the dashboard, clicked on any buttons, entered fields, you've no lines of code written, and we're already creating customers, creating objects, experimenting and learning about the shapes of the responses and the objects that we're creating in the API.
And this is super handy because I feel like a lot of developers feel most comfortable in the terminal. So to be able to use a CLI to run all these commands is super handy.
For sure. And like when you just kind of want to ramp a customer like really quickly, opening your browser, going to the section, creating a customer, like this is obviously the most quick way you can do that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So let's go ahead and delete them. So that's kind of our CRUDs kind of looped on. Let's see. Oh wait, sorry. It wants me to confirm. Yep. Okay, and it was deleted. So let's issue that again, and we can see. Okay, it was a 404. That customer doesn't exist. Okay. Cool. So that's kind of like the CRUD. I also showed listing actually here. So that's a pretty common, a common API endpoint for all of our resources. Cool. So maybe it kind of, I think that's pretty, let's say, fundamental. So creating resources, getting them from the API, updating. But let's like create, let's like issue an create an example that's a little bit more involved, but it really hits home the point that the CLI is a fantastic way to learn about the API and to experiment with it and see really what's going on in the system. So what we're going to do is we're going to first we'll create a customer, and then we're going to create a payment for that customer that confirms immediately using a tokenized payment method, and we're going to save that payment method on that customer for future usage off session, which means that you can charge that customer's payment method while they're not on your browser or like not on your site, right? So like maybe there's a surcharge or something like that, or a tip or something like that. So again, it sounds like a mouthful, but with the command line interface, it really isn't super hard at all. So we're going to create a payment intent. It's going to want an amount, so we'll give it 11 euros 11 cents. So if you haven't used the API before, everything is in the smallest currency denomination, right? So this integer 1111 is 11 euros 11 cents. We're going to confirm it immediately. We're going to give it a payment method of PM card Visa. So this is what we call, you might hear the term magic string or token. So this is essentially one of our test tokens for a payment method, which is the card 4242 4242 4242 4242, which is the card that just works, right? So it's one of the most common test cards because you just want to make a payment flow work. And if you look on our test page for our cards, there's tons of cards that provoke other different outcomes, like a charge being declined or a 3DS being required and things like that. But PM card Visa is one of the most common.
Awesome.
And then we're going to set up future usage to be off session. So if I got that right, it should run for a minute or a second. Cool, it worked. So let's jump into the dashboard. That would have worked.
One quick question I have, because we have a lot of people coming in from Nigeria, from India, from UK, from kind of all over the world. Do y'all support basically all world currencies for the most part?
A lot. You can go to, I think it's in the docs currencies, but there we have like a list of all of the currencies that are supported. It's a lot.
Cool.
It's a lot. Yeah, for sure. So if I open the dashboard and jump to payments, we have this succeeded payment intent for the right amount. I didn't pass the customer. All right, let's do that again. Okay. Let me list the customer. I really wanted to get that right the first time. Okay.
All right. When you don't, because I feel like this is very similar to what would happen when people are actually doing this themselves.
All right. So we've got a second payment intent. It's succeeded for that customer FUBAR. There's the 4240 payment for the card number I was referring to. That customer has an attached payment method. That's the PM underscore that was generated. And we can see here it was started, it succeeded, and the payment method was successfully set up for future off-session payments. So again, wasn't that hard to do. No lines of code, no clicking around and associating things in the dashboard. It's a really, really fast way to get up and running, kind of learning about how the API works. Cool. So let's maybe one more nice to have, which is a new feature, quite a new feature. Both in the API and now available via the command line interface CLI, is that you can search for a lot of the resources in your account now. So if you've integrated with Stripe, you'll know that. Let's say you wanted to filter all of your customers and find all the people called FUBAR, right, in your Stripe account. You would have had to list and then iterate through all of your customers and then find those customers and filter them out and do whatever you're doing with them. But now we have search against a lot of our resources like charges, payment intents, customers. So you can, and we have like a pretty great query language where you can just go and search for your customers using like exact matching and substring matching, and I think for integers, greater than, less than, things like that. So a little shout out to the search team. Highly recommend checking that out.
Awesome.
Cool. Okay, so that's kind of like the fundamentals of interacting with the API and creating resources and listing and finding them and all that. So let's move on to like webhooks and events. So if you've integrated with Stripe, you'll know that a webhook endpoint is a really, really fundamental part of your system. The reason being, in your Stripe account, when things happen, like customers being created or payments happening, events are being generated, and we want to let you know about those events because it's important. So you need a way in your system to listen out for the events being generated on Stripe. So maybe just a recap about, well, what is a webhook endpoint if you haven't built one before? So just as you can make requests to Stripe to carry out actions like creating payments, Stripe can make requests back to your system to let you know about these important events, right? So maybe you have a post request to Stripe that creates a customer. We can post, if you tell us, we can post into your system and let you know about really important events, right? So that's obviously, it's a very, and I suppose you could say like one of the features of all of the different payment of I suppose the richness of payment methods these days, a lot of them are asynchronous, right? So here in Europe, a SEPA debit, right, which is a really, really popular way to pay for things, that can take up to 14 days to clear. Like normally not, it usually takes around 2 business days, but you need to be listening out for that payment up to 14 days, let's say, after somebody's paid. So it's really important to have a system that can sit there and listen for these really important events. So so you'll need a webhook.
Before we dive in, we have a couple quick questions if you don't
All
mind.
Right.
So one left over from that currency talk is the currency tag for USD.
So sorry, let me just maximize that window to read the question. Yes, the currency, yeah, USD, they'll all be ISO, so you can just look them up, but they're all listed. They're certainly listed in the docs. It should be a really short URL. It's probably like under docs currencies or supported -currencies or something like that. I can dig it out when maybe in a few minutes. But
yeah.
Definitely the identifier for dollars is USD. That's for sure.
Awesome. And then one question about webhooks. So is it possible to determine an invoice has been paid from the CLI without using a webhook?
Yep, you would the simplest way would just be to retrieve the invoice from the API using the ID. So if you have that ID, you can just pull it. You can just pull that invoice directly from the API, or you can list your invoices and then just iterate through them. Like we also we use a tool called JQ a lot. I'm not so great at it, but my colleague CJ is like really good. So you could like list. Oh, thank you. You could list all of your invoices, and then you can iterate through them and see which ones are paid, and then you could do something with them on in a script. So yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. Cool. And we're getting a couple more currency questions, but we have the documentation link on the screen. So go ahead and check that out.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. All right. So webhooks. So let me just dive into the dashboard again. Under this developer section, we have this webhooks. So when you add a webhook endpoint, I'm not going to do it now, but this is where you would do it if you're doing it through the dashboard. So let's say you've got your productive system. It's called production.com. I didn't spell that right, whatever, prod.com/endpoint. So when you configure this endpoint and then you choose the events you'd like to listen to, let's say checkout session completed if you're a checkout user, Stripe will then begin to send to post these events to this endpoint as post requests. So then the question then I suppose becomes, well, what happens when I'm developing locally? I want to listen out for those events locally. And the simple answer is we have the Stripe CLI. Let me jump into the right directory here. Stripe CLI has this event called Listen, and we can basically stream in real time all of the events that are happening on your account into the CLI here. So let's talk about quickly, like what are some things that would result in events happening. So if you click around the dashboard and you create a customer, you're going to get a customer created event as a result of that. If you write some code that hits the API and creates customers and payments, events are going to be triggered as a result of that. If you create objects via the CLI, which we're going to do now, we're going to see those events. So there's kind of a lot of ways that events will be generated, but when you're developing via the CLI is by far the simplest. So let's create another customer. And there's our customer created event. So we're streaming them down in real time from our Stripe account, right? So pretty simple, but like really, really powerful. So you can see it all. You can kind of keep track of all of the events that are happening in your account. Let's move on, or we can also actually, if you want, you can filter those. So let's filter for payment intent succeeded events. Okay, payment intent succeeded. Cool. And let's say you're only concerned about that particular type of event. So let's create a payment intent. I think we can do that last one that we had. Yeah. Oh, no such customer. I deleted it. Okay, never mind. We're gonna let's see. I thought what we're gonna do. Oh, this is from a previous session, so that customer just doesn't exist at all. So let's just create this. Set up future. What did I do? Off session typos. Okay.
So cool. You can see how clear these error messages are, right? So it's very okay. What did I miss?
Yeah, they're super helpful. So in fact, I think there's certainly there's even like spelling corrections and stuff like that, I think these days in certain error messages. So we can see that we filtered just for the payment intent succeeded event. But if I get rid of that, an interesting thing. Listen. An interesting thing is that, or at least worth noting, is that a payment intent succeeded event is dependent on two other events, right? So it's dependent on its creation and also that a charge succeeded. So a payment intent itself, so we're getting a bit into the weeds of the payment intent API itself, but a payment intent is a state machine that produces charges. So it's really an intent for someone to pay for something. So I suppose really the illustration here is that you can filter out other events if you'd like. I tend not to because I want to see everything that's going on in my system and all of the events, but it's there if you want it. So let's trigger. So we've created events by creating objects via the CLI in the API, but sometimes you might want to just like cut to the chase of a particular event. And a really good example of this is like a checkout session completed event. So like getting to that event or making that event happen takes quite a lot of steps. You need to create a checkout session. You need to actually get a user to, be forwarded to the checkout system, input a payment method, and lots of stuff. But you can use the trigger command. We'll pipe that to bat as well. Here's a list of all of the events that you can just trigger directly via the CLI. So this is really great. So if let's say you're building your new system to process orders for your t-shirts, and you're using checkout, and you just want to listen for that one checkout event so that you can get the line items to fulfill your order, you can just trigger that directly from the command line. So Stripe trigger checkout, checkout session completed. And what you'll see here is checkout CLI is doing all the work for you. It's setting up all of these fixtures to make all of those API calls happen that eventually result in a checkout session completed event being streamed down to the CLI. So again, really powerful stuff when you want to develop quickly and just like be really, really fast.
Yeah, that was so fast.
Yeah. So yeah, and by the way, all of these events themselves, they're objects. They're objects in and of themselves. So you can grab them and hopefully it's propagated through. Let's see. Well, it might not have propagated through, but here we go. This is like that event. And so you can actually go and inspect, in more detail, everything that's going on with this event data. And the same goes for logs over here. So great. So I don't know. Now you might kind of wonder, wait, okay, how do I actually make use of those events now that I can listen to them on the Stripe CLI? And previously you could have used something like ngrok or some third-party tunneling software, but now it's available right in the CLI. So let me actually start a new window here. I'm going to jump into Vim real quick.
I know we've got a lot of Vim users on this too, ironically. We always have people on the VS Code streams who are like,
that's
no,
cool. my peeps. Let's see. I think I jumped out of my teamux. Hi. No, I didn't. All right. So yeah, I'm not the greatest Vim user in the world, but I do kind of like, I do feel productive in it. So let's see if I can do this correctly. So I have a really, really simple node server in the root of my little VS Code project there. And I just want to point, we're going to ignore most of this and we'll delve into it from the VS Code extension. But let's just look at this here. So this is the post route. So as I was saying earlier, to create a webhook endpoint, you need a route, a post route into your system that Stripe can post events to. So that's what's happening here. And we'll ignore this. We'll go through all that later. And all this endpoint or all this server is doing and this endpoint is doing is logging out the type of event that arrived at this endpoint, right? So just to illustrate what's going on there. So we're going to start that server and it's going to listen on 4242. Great. So now we want to listen. And let's look at the help for that. I'm going to have to bat that too. We're going to use this forward to flag. So forward to localhost 4242 on webhook endpoint. All right, I didn't think any typos there. Cool. So let's trigger that checkout session completed event again. So we should see, yeah. So those events are now being streamed down locally from your account into the Stripe CLI, and the Stripe CLI is saying, cool, I'm going to forward them on to localhost 4242 webhook endpoint as posts, and that's what's happening down here. So our logs, basically, we can see from the logs, if I can expand that, we got all of the event types, customer created, payment intent created, etc. And this is probably the one we want to get to eventually, so we can grab the line items and then fulfill an order or something like that. But yeah, like it kind of seemed like magic a little bit the first time I did it, but it's really useful when you're developing your webhook endpoint to fulfill orders and things like that. So you just keep triggering them, and yeah, you'll get all of those events locally.
Awesome.
Yeah, so really cool. So now we have a system where we can like create events, listen, we can build our webhook endpoint, we can like manipulate resources via the API. So I think the next thing to do is look at how all this works in the VS Code extension. But before we do that, I just want to point out this one really cool feature that just shipped like in the last few months. And that's a thing called the Stripe shell. So if you go to anywhere under stripe.com/docs, you'll see this little button here. Now, if you click it, you're going to land in this thing called the Stripe shell. And the Stripe shell is essentially the Stripe CLI in the browser. So you can go and list your customers. customers, list your customers, and it will, give you that data back, and you can do
That's cool.
things like you can copy that result there. You can drop all this stuff out, copy IDs here. You can go and then Stripe customers, and it's got tab completion too, so you can like tab through. These are clickable, so it's just like super nice to use. So we can retrieve. Did I copy it correctly? I didn't. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
that's
it's all there.
awesome.
And then you can go as far as saying, right, we're going to listen for our events here too. And then we'll trigger events from the shell as well. And this kind of blew my mind the first time I saw it, because wait, I'm getting all those events on my local machine too, on my server, because I'm logged into my account here in the browser.
Mm-hmm.
So this is all connected. And like, I don't know, initially it wasn't super obvious to me, but when I did it the first time, I was like, this is great.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it gives you the freedom to kind of choose your own experience too, right?
Oh, totally.
And have whatever UI you want.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
absolutely. And like just the convenience. And by the way, for the VS Code users, and I'm kind of a new person to VS Code, but for the VS Code users out there, command backtick in the browser on Stripe will toggle the shell out.
Oh, nice. You're speaking to us.
And so what you can do is this you can be surfing around the docs, and you'll see some examples here and there, and maybe, I don't know, let's see if there's one on here. Please watch this video, by the way, by CJ on the Stripe CLI. It's awesome. So you can see examples in the doc. You can just command backtick, paste the example straight into the CLI, or into the shell rather, and you're off to the races. So cool. I highly recommend playing with that. It's just fun.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
We have a couple questions before we dive into kind of the VS Code. So one's pretty specific to their use case. Is there any difference in the subscription events that are being created through Stripe Checkout versus Stripe Self-Serve Customer Portal? They're interested in using Stripe Checkout as low code.
Yeah, no, they're all the same events. It's just like the only difference there is really how you're generating those events, essentially, whether you want to be where you want to use like a no code solution, or have like a really embedded subscription creation service, or I suppose service on your site. They're all the same events, and you can listen and react to them as you see fit.
Awesome.
For sure.
Yep. One other question we have, when you create a new customer, can you charge them whenever you want? If so, can't that be dangerous if someone else uses it?
So that kind of speaks a little bit to the example I created earlier on, where we saved a payment method for off session use, so you can charge a customer in the future. The most important thing here really is that nobody can ever use that payment method except you. You own that secret key, which we encourage you to keep very, very secret, right? Never to check it. I'm going to show you actually a really nice feature in the VS Code extension that helps you with that. But ultimately, it's not dangerous unless you leak your key. And that's just like a general problem. If your key leaks, your secret key, then people can do nefarious things. But as long as you don't, no one can ever touch those customers, see them, payment methods, cards, what have you. It's all secret. Yeah?
Okay, definitely good to know.
Yeah. We can touch on some like how you might go about that. And one feature the extension gives us out of the box to protect you.
Cool. Okay. And then we got one comment saying this is epic. So
cool.
I think we're on the right track.
Thanks, Thomas. We're just standing on the shoulders of giants, to be honest. I'm just the guy to get to play with these great toys, Cool. So let's jump into VS Code and see what we have here. All right. So let's look at this server.js. So previously I showed this in Vim, but we're gonna load this up in the IDE. So this is our secret key, and this is what you shouldn't do. And I did this on purpose because I want to show you that the Stripe for VS Code extension, it will detect secret keys in your code and nag you, is like, don't do this. And it's going to point you at the docs of like how to keep your keys safe, right? So nice. That to the previous person's question. Yeah, don't do this. Store your keys in a secret store of some sort or in environment variables. But it's like, that's just best practice for anything that's secret. It's like, don't commit them to your source code, to GitHub or whatever source code system you're using. Same goes for this WHSec, which is called a webhook secret. So this is really important when you're developing a webhook endpoint, right? And we'll really delve into this right now. So this secret is generated, in this case, it's actually generated when we start listen. So Stripe listen, and we're going to see it here. Here we go. That's that secret we've just seen. Now, when you actually create those create webhooks in your dashboard, you're going to get a different secret for every webhook endpoint. Now, the significance of that is like only Stripe knows that secret, and only you and your system knows that secret. So only Stripe and you and your system can verify that an event that arrives at your webhook endpoint is actually from Stripe and that it's authentic. And because, let's say for the sake of argument, you've got a pretty well obfuscated webhook endpoint that somebody can't guess, but somebody guesses it and starts posting events to your endpoint to try and get an order or something like that. You can throw those events away by virtue of the fact that this secret, how this is going to work. You can detect that they're bad actors, let's say, and just like get rid of that traffic.
Okay, that's helpful.
How does it work? So basically what we do is we grab the raw body post from the request, and that's what we call the payload, right? So that's the raw event payload coming from Stripe. Along with that post request, we send what's called a Stripe signature. Now, this is a hash of the payload of the event with the endpoint secret, and that's sent in a header called Stripe signature. So what construct event does, and construct event you get for free if you like in the Stripe node client libraries, we pass the raw body post, we pass the endpoint secret, and then the signature. And then internally to construct event, what it does is it tries to reconstruct that signature by hashing the payload with the secret, and then it compares them. And if they don't match, we say, no, the webhook signature verification failed, and you can just ignore that post. But if not, then you can be confident that that event really originated at Stripe, and then you can go ahead and process it. So cool. So now we know that we can have a really secure endpoint that you're only processing events that really were sent from Stripe. So one other really nice feature that you get with the Stripe VS Code extension are these snippets. So, for example, let's say here you got a customer created event, and to the previous question about databases, this is a really common pattern, right? So you might get a customer that's created, and you want to save that against a user record in your own database so that you can keep track of them, and you might charge them in the future. So, for example, we've got customers create. And so you get these snippets directly out of out of the box with the extension. Now this is a pretty simple one. Like, let's do one that's a bit more complicated. So we can ask for Stripe session. So here we go, right? So we can create a checkout session, and it gives you all of these pre-filled parameters to go ahead and like create a checkout session. Another really nice. Yeah, it's so cool, and like. That's one thing I don't have in my, I suppose I don't have my Vim setup. So
snippets are the way to go in VS Code. They're amazing.
So props to the VS Code folks. And a really nice thing I think as well, when you're developing, you can like hover over these keywords, and it will dump you directly into the CLI or into the API ref in the language you're using, by the way. So Node in this case. So you can go and check out, your code samples, check out all of the different parameters you can use with that call. And the same goes for the actual, the command. So create, in this case, it will send you, if I can hover correctly, into the API reference for checkout sessions create. So that's like immensely useful if you want to go and see all of the different things that you can pass to that command, that function. All right. Cool. Are we motoring too fast? 42. Okay. Maybe one more thing. One more thing that we can do with the extension. Let's see. Let me check my notes. Oh yeah, of course. Sorry, we didn't go through any of the actual extension itself. So if we go, you can install it from the extensions. Do you call it a store, or is it a library?
Marketplace.
Okay, thank you. Learning, always be learning. Okay, so in the marketplace, you can install the Stripe extension from there. So let's just deal with events, right? Let's see what we have here. Let's get rid of a few of these. We're going to use that samples. That's really, really cool. I really want to get to that. So, but we'll just show. So everything you've seen on this on the command line, you've got in the CLI, right? Or sorry, in the IDE now. So you can start streaming your events. Let's trigger one. Let's see. So let's trigger a customer. Let's trigger a customer created event. The output is doing that. And there you go. So you've got you can actually trigger all those events directly from the IDE now. And the same goes for checkout session completed. And we should see quite a few events streaming in. Cool. So that's working. takes a second sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go one step further. And we've seen all of this, but it's just great to know that it's all right there in the IDE.
Right.
So we're going to forward all of those events now to a webbook endpoint. This is our connect. There's a different endpoint for connect events. We're going to ignore that for the moment, though, because we're not going to deal with connect today. But great, we're forwarding events. Let's start our node server. Have I killed it in here? I have. So node server. So this is great, right? You don't have to leave your IDE if you want to develop your webhook endpoint. So here we go. So we're getting all of these events delivered to our server JS. So that's in the code base, all in the IDE. So in a way, like it's quite a short demonstration in the IDE, but because we've seen it all on the CLI.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a requirement, by the way. So you have to install the CLI, to actually make use of the VS Code extension.
That's awesome, because I really like how you went from one, you showed the CLI, you showed the shell, you showed in VS Code. It's kind of like a choose your own adventure sort of thing, y'all, right? You can kind of just pick wherever you're most comfortable and then go from there.
Absolutely, yeah, and it's like without a doubt, like this is a really nice way to develop. And if you're using a software stack like Rails or my Fastify server here is a bit too rudimentary, but that's doing like hot reloading of code. You can see that that's really nice. So you can literally just be like coding away in your server JS, on your webhook endpoint, trigger your events, and just like literally iterate like really quickly while you're coding. All right, so okay, cool. I think we wanted to get to 50 minutes. I'm gonna do one more thing. So we're going to stand up a fully working Stripe integration in just a few clicks using Stripe samples. So I'm going to jump quickly into the CLI. So if we say Stripe samples list, we're going to get a list of samples. These are all samples that you can clone and run from our GitHub repository of Stripe samples. So I'm going to use accept a payment. In fact, I don't need to copy that at all, because if I say let's start a Stripe with a Stripe sample, this is the same list we just saw, by the way. So I'm going to say accept a payment. I'm going to use the payment element. I'd like a simple HTML front end. I'm going to use Ruby as the back end. And I'm going to say, yeah, just call it accept a payment. So that's, yeah, okay. It wants to clone the sample into my my project root. All right, so it's cloning away. All right, I'm going to open in a new window, and it's going to dump us into the README for that project, by the way, so you can go and see all the awesome stuff you can do with this project. But let's look at it here. So this project, so we've cloned a whole working Sinatra app. If we look into the server RB, very simple, but it's running on Sinatra in Ruby. So what I really want to show you, though, is, and there's also like this client directory with all of our, our basic client code. HTML and JavaScript to drive the sample. But what I really want to show is this in the .env file, because we were logged in with the Stripe CLI already to our account, it's initialized all of the keys for you, right? So you don't need to configure anything. So let's jump into the server directory, CD server. We're going to bundle all of the Ruby gems that this project needs. Let's run the server. Now, I bet you I've got the server running over here. I do. So I'm going to like kill that because it wants the same port. So I'm just going to kill these. Here we go. Run the server. Okay, it does some basic checks. Do you have a .env file? Are the keys there? And if we jump into the browser at 4242, we have a fully working payment element integration with a backend with a working front end. And you can go and like, I'm going to put in the basic 4242 cards. And okay, no, it's not. It's past 2022 now. And this is fully working. So you can go and there's our payment intent that we just created against our account. You can go and experiment with that and all from just a few clicks in the VS Code extension. So yeah, super nice to get up and running with your integration.
So I actually just learned about that 4242 card from Cecil actually this week. So that's just like the built-in test card, right? So anytime you're doing a test payment, you can use that.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump into the docs actually. Stripe test cards, because it is really important to know about these. So for example, you can test like cards by brand, cards by country. You can simulate declines. In Europe, for example, very important. You can test like 3D secure authentication. In fact, that's kind of a fun thing we can test. Let's copy that card, plug it in here, and what you'll see is if I try to pay, that card is going to say, no, I want to be a processing error card. Is that the right card? Let's see. Where's the... Maybe it was a stretch to maybe this card. Let's see. This is one thing I didn't rehearse, by the way. So
I like it.
I'm flying by the proverbial seat. Okay, here we go. Okay, cool. So this card requires 3D secure authentication. So that's like an important regulation here in Europe, that credit cards need to be authenticated, right? 3D secure. So you can actually, with these test cards, provoke those test scenarios, and you can go and complete or fail the authentication. For example, we can fail that, and we should be redirected. Oh, there you go. Sorry, and then failed authentication, and you need to provide a new payment method. So the point I wanted to make was, like, there's tons of different ways to test your integration. And let's look at that one card we did use here earlier on, 1242442. Here we go. So earlier on, when we were using the Stripe CLI, this is that token that I was speaking about. So this is basically a pre-tokenized, if you like, string that you can use that represents this card. So yeah, when you're using the Stripe CLI, you can use those payment methods here.
Awesome. This is super handy. So y'all don't just have to like try to figure out how to test this. It's
exactly.
All right.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all there for you. And the same goes, by the way, for other types of payments, like SEPA debits with IBANs and all that kind of stuff. So it's not just cards. So yeah, there's tons of test data out there for you.
Awesome. We got some good feedback saying the VS Code Stripe extension looks great. Tons of processes being one click away from you is really nice to have. So lots of good feedback coming through the chat.
Awesome.
All right. Anything else you want to show, Matt?
That's everything I got for
Stripe. Cool. That was so good. So much good stuff. We had I think, if anyone has any final questions, definitely post them now. But I know we had a lot throughout the chat that we were able to answer during the demo.
Also, don't hesitate to reach out to us on Twitter. And we also have our own Discord server. And there are Stripe engineers manning that server, or sorry, personally in that server all the time. So you can go and like just chat directly with Stripe engineers about your integration. And they're awesome. I highly recommend going checking that out.
That's awesome. I love that you guys have that direct link there.
Yeah.
All right, cool. Well, thank you so much, Matt, for coming. If y'all missed any of this, at the very start, we went over what Stripe was. So this will be available on our YouTube channel that you can watch after to replay this awesome demo and hear a little bit more about what you can do with the CLI and then moving into VS Code with the extension. All right. Well, we hope to see you on here again, Matt, but thank you. We really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much, Olivia. It was absolutely brilliant being on. Thank you.
Awesome. And thank you all for joining. Definitely reach out to Matt and the team at Stripe if you have any questions. And come join us next week for another live stream. If you're watching from YouTube, make sure that you are subscribing to our channel. And while you're at it, go ahead and subscribe to our TikTok channel as well, so you can see what we're up to throughout the week. Until next time, thanks, y'all.
Thank you.